Zinc and stomach acid have like the cyclical relationship. We need stomach acid to liberate zinc from our food that we're eating, but then we need zinc in order to create stomach acid.
I gotta get myself a little more faith, a little more love.
I'm your host, Krista Bigler, and I'm going to guess we have at least one thing in common, that we're both in pursuit of a less stressed life. On this show, I'll be interviewing experts and sharing clinical pearls from my years of practice to support high-performing, health-savvy women in pursuit of abundance and a less stressed life. One of my beliefs is that we always have options for getting the results we want, so let's see what's out there together.
Just keep breaking. I gotta get myself a little more faith, a little more love.
Today on The Less Stressed Life, I have Brandy Hammerding, who is a certified nutrition therapy practitioner and the driving force behind Be Collective Wellness. She's on a mission to empower women through personalized nutrition coaching with a strong focus on digestive and hormone health. As a self-proclaimed diet culture dropout, Brandy is dedicated to providing nutrition support that's sustainable and provides flexibility. Her goal is to guide women through overcoming challenges like bloating, fatigue, PMS, and irregular menstrual cycle. By eliminating these symptoms, she helps her clients feel more connected to their bodies, paving the way for a vibrant and energetic life. So Brandy and I were just talking before I hit record about how we met each other. We met each other in this group of practitioners that a mutual colleague of hers and a mutual colleague of mine started together. And I ended up there because I was asked to give a breathwork session to that group. And then they invited me to be in it. And what a lovely, beautiful, cool group of women. So I've already had one or two people on the show from that group. And now Brandy's here. And I posted a thread and said, what are you excited about right now? What are you passionate about? Brandy's, I'm super passionate about stomach acid and digestion. And I was like, I know, me too. And actually, I was at a conference on this note. I used to do stomach acid assessment when people walked through the door of my program. And then a couple of years ago, I dropped it off because when you do a lot of things, there's a lot of content and sometimes you cut things because you're trying to simplify. And then I was at a conference in March and I just felt like the topic came up constantly. And I always joke to my clients that they can write on my tombstone, like, no one digested properly. Like that was like the punchline of my life. Like no one was digesting. That's your problem. That was like half of your problems right there. And I decided to bring back stomach acid assessment as a first line thing, because if people don't necessarily believe you, they're like, I think I digest fine. I poop. I don't see anything undigested. So I don't think it's important. And so we can talk a little bit about that, but that's where I'm coming in from that. Sometimes our interest is renewed, which is why I love podcast stuff. If you're listening to this, good on you, because I think sometimes we just have to keep refreshing our brain, or even if we think we know a topic, it's good to revisit it to just be like inspired in a different way. So thank you for coming on the show to do just that for us today. Okay.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. All right. Let's make this matter to people, because that's all people care about. People just want to know how it affects them. And also we could talk about like how you became obsessed with this, because I just talked about it from my perspective. So let's actually start with how you became obsessed with it. And then we'll talk about why people should care. What are the signs and symptoms of stomach acid issues?
Yeah. With the population of people that I work with, I mainly work with women. And I'm finding that a lot of women are dealing with GI discomfort of some sort. And I started to unravel all this, learn a lot more. I really utilize the GI map test within my practice as well. And I'm seeing a lot of like digestive dysfunction. And when we think about digestion, a lot of people are like, oh, you just eat and like your body takes care of everything. Yes and no. Yes, it does. But we have to make sure that we have optimized our body so that it can take care of all of the steps it needs to do to digest and absorb the nutrients from your food. Because there's difference. There's difference between eating the food and absorbing the nutrients from your food. So I got really obsessed around stomach acid, and I was like, more people need to know about the importance of stomach acid, because I feel like so many people think that, oh, this acid reflux and this heartburn is so bad, and I have too much stomach acid, and they've been told that by maybe their medical providers, and they've been led down the wrong path for like too long. And now they're having all of these other GI symptoms that pop up as a result. And so I'm like, let's look at like the root cause and really think about how we can optimize digestion, and looking at what role does stomach acid play in your health and wellness journey.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so you just talked about some of the symptoms that people experience if they have poor stomach acid, which it feels confusing. heartburn, reflux, even maybe pain in the stomach, which could be this acidic feeling similar to how an ulcer may feel. My experience,
Yeah.
I'll just mention really quickly, is that hasn't been very fruitful for people to go try to assess for ulcers. So usually I just soothe that GI lining, honestly.
Yep.
Are there burping? Those are really common ones, but what do you
Mhm.
think about some other possible signs and symptoms of people who don't have adequate stomach acid?
Gas and bloating, for sure. Gas and bloating is such a blanket symptom, and there's so many different root causes. This is an easy box to check and like to support stomach acid and be like, hey, do we see improvements? Feeling excessively full at meals, like when you're eating, you're like, oh, I'm just so full. Or I've had clients too who are like, I know I should eat again. It's time to eat again, but I'm still so full from my last meal because they don't have enough stomach acid to be digesting that food that they ate at that meal. You can also have some food sensitivities can be related to not having enough stomach acid and a whole bunch of digestive processes being hindered there. Having weak nails, brittle hair, all of that can be related. Like a lot of people don't correlate that. If you have difficulty digesting meat, I've worked with clients in the past who are like, oh, all of a sudden meat became like unappealing or I was having a harder time digesting it. And so I went to more of a plant-based diet, which then alleviates their symptoms temporarily, but then the symptoms end up showing up a little bit later as well. And then there can also be seeing undigested food in your stool. Like we shouldn't see carrots and broccoli and lettuce in our stool. If you're seeing that, you might not have enough stomach acid.
Yeah, for sure. And to your point, you brought up a lot of things that are downstream, breaking of the nails, etc. And I think it can literally just be anything, right? Of course,
Yeah.
right? You gave all the most obvious ones, but it could be anything after a long time. And to your point, I think that some people end up eliminating meat out of their diet because of low stomach acid, because that wasn't appealing. So it's almost a question I ask people when they eliminate meat is, oh, did you have did it feel like you couldn't digest it? If you're not digesting animal proteins and getting amino acids, then anything could go wrong. Anything.
Yeah. Hormones, neurotransmitters, immune system, like anything.
Everything. So no wonder it's like, good grief, mind explosion. Why wouldn't I love them talking about this? Okay. So where this is a little bit tricky is that population that is also so fun to help, the people that have acid reflux and who have been given acid blocking medication. So let's unpack this, maybe starting with, okay, this is our simpleton approach. Or, oh, people are acidic, let's give them acid reducers. And understandably, it does calm symptoms for people. So let's unpack that. What's happening? What happens when people take medications?
Yeah. So the two medications that are typically prescribed would be a PPI, a proton pump inhibitor, or an H2 blocker. And what the PPI is doing is it's blocking the protein needed for stomach acid production. So your protein that you need to make your stomach acid. And the H2 blockers are then blocking the histamine receptor that is generating your stomach acid. So it's temporary, it's like blocking the creation of more stomach acid. So yes, it's going to alleviate these symptoms that people are having because there's less stomach acid. But we have to be like, well, why are you having this acid reflux or heartburn symptom to begin with? We have to think about like digestion being a north to south process, and everything that happens in the north is going to affect things in the south. And so what is happening that the acid, like the sphincter, the opening between the esophagus and the stomach, that's not closing all the way. And we actually need to have sufficient amount of stomach acid to trigger the closing of that opening, that little sphincter. And if we don't have sufficient stomach acid, it can hang open. And the little bit of stomach acid we have can actually be refluxing up and causing the symptoms that people are experiencing.
Such a catch-22, right? So when people hear this, I think maybe sometimes their thought process is to just stop acid blockers. I think there's a little more of a gradual process. And just a disclaimer, neither Brandy or I could tell anyone to stop their acid blockers because we're not physicians, and only a physician can tell someone to stop their medication. So just to be really clear about what's acceptable, not acceptable. Anytime someone asks me if they can stop their medication, I tell them it's not up to me to make that decision. If you have a client who's, I would like to do this, how might you support them to eat off of it?
We would need to look at like upper gastric healing. We need to really soothe that lining, and they definitely need to have that conversation with their doctor and be like, hey, I'm interested in like weaning off this as well. But let's support what was maybe inflamed and how we can. I always want to put out the fire before adding more to it. So for some people, they can tolerate maybe using some digestive bitters or maybe a little apple cider vinegar at the time, but other people, they can't because that can trigger the acid reflux as well. So we need to first soothe and heal that lining first before then we can think about now increasing your stomach acid to an appropriate level.
For sure. Let's talk about some things that help support soothing and healing the upper lining. And to your point, those are really introductory things that sometimes people do, like shots of lemon juice or apple cider vinegar, or even stomach acid repletion, but it may not be the first step if you're already really acidic. We have to put out the fire. So let's talk about some things that help do that.
Yeah. Aloe vera juice, some chlorophyll, marshmallow root is really good. There's some different teas out there that can be really calming and soothing to that lining. Zinc is really important for the stomach and for stomach acid production. So a zinc supplement might be something that you can consider bringing in as well. But we don't want to bring in anything that's like really acidic to add more fire to a fiery situation.
And deglycerized licorice, I'll offer.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Deglycerized is the important word there. Although licorice, if people have high blood pressure, can raise it. Now, deglycerized licorice is not supposed to raise high blood pressure, but just my experience is that maybe it has raised it like 10 points. So I was trying to ask, even though usually my clients aren't experiencing high blood pressure. Every once in a while, they will say, hey, I noticed my blood pressure went up 10 points. It's like, oh, here we go. Even when it's not supposed to, sometimes it does.
Yep.
So first soothing, and then correcting the root causes of low stomach acid. So we forgot the step, which is what causes low stomach acid or what's happening in people's lives that reduces stomach acid in the first place.
Yeah. One, having enough zinc is very important for stomach acid production. Zinc and stomach acid have like the cyclical relationship. We need stomach acid to liberate zinc from our food that we're eating, but then we need zinc in order to create stomach acid. So zinc is really important in this whole process. But then stress is a big thing. And when our body is in a very stressed out state, when we're in that sympathetic nervous system is being activated, we are not prioritizing proper digestion. Stomach acid juices, gastric juices are not being secreted. That's all being put on the back burner because the body is prioritizing fleeing from this stressful situation. So with the sympathetic, it's the fight or flight. Our body's in this fight or flight mode. We want to activate that parasympathetic nervous system where we are in that rest and digest area where the body can prioritize proper digestion. Another factor that could impact that would be if you have an underlying H. pylori issue. So H. pylori is a bacteria that does like to take up home in your stomach. And a lot of people have it. It's very easy to transmit through saliva, contaminated water, fecal transmission. And this bacteria, what it does is it likes to burrow down into the stomach lining. And then it likes to secrete an enzyme to decrease the amount of stomach acid that you have available because it can't thrive in an acidic environment. If you have an underlying H. pylori infection, that can definitely be triggering you to have low stomach acid. Age is a big factor. If you're over the age of 65, digestive function starts to decrease a little bit. If you've had any surgeries on your stomach, so somebody that maybe has some bariatric surgery and they had part of their stomach removed, we have less parietal cells then available to create and release that stomach acid. So you're going to need maybe a little bit more support and be very mindful of that. And then if you are eating more of a vegetarian or vegan-based diet, if we're not stimulating the parietal cells to release the stomach acid when we ate meat, animal proteins, then the body's going to stop producing as much. And so people who have more of a plant-based diet do tend to have not enough stomach acid.
Yeah. There's a few things I wanted to highlight about that list that you just provided. So one thing I wanted to say about H. pylori that I thought was really relevant that you brought up already, but I'm just going to highlight was that H. pylori is like a spirochete. So it likes to burrow in. It's very spiral. I always get a bit timid about talking about H. pylori without context, and I want to offer some now. My experience working conventionally for many years is that this very underdiagnosed or inaccurately diagnosed as many chronic gut issues are or imbalances, unless the symptoms are extremely acute and very severe, usually it's not going to be picked up by conventional testing. However, if you look at the literature, it shows that in the United States alone, H. pylori prevalence is at least 30% of the population, which is
Wow.
pretty significant. So if you literally just look that up, it'll pop right up. And then I want to say that in the Middle East, it even goes to 60%. And I have a
Wow.
friend who's originally from Jordan, and she said that part of their culture is to actually chew on mastic gum post meals, which I think is so fascinating, right?
Mhm.
Now,
Yeah.
how H. pylori became so prevalent, honestly, I don't know. I'm not sure, but we do know, as you mentioned already, that we share that among people we live with, right? So when we share out of cups and we share spoons and things, it's very, or kissing, it's very commonly transmitted. And I think I was actually pondering this. This is a funny story. I've been looking for an opportunity to share this. So perfect. Here we go. I think that I've talked to a veterinarian before about this, and she said H. pylori is actually really common in dogs as well. And so there's a lot of vomiting and things, but I was in a public bathroom just a couple of days ago, and I heard these women talking about the color of the water of the toilet being blue. And one of the women said, I don't like to put that stuff in my tank because the dogs drink out of the toilet. And I was just thinking, because I don't have a dog.
Wow.
And I got to thinking, oh my gosh, no wonder like this gets shared so much, because
Right.
as if your toilet is clean when, and in reality, I think this is pretty common for a dog that comes inside to drink out of the toilet. It's, I'm thirsty, here's the water. But it's duh. Of
Yeah.
course, your dog is going to get everything that's in your digestive tract if they're going to drink out of your toilet water. I don't care that you flushed it down. That is not clean. And then your dog licks your face and it's under. Like, we're just sharing this whole fecal oral route. And I just had an epiphany right there in the bathroom.
Yeah, I love
And
it.
the teen hearing these other two women talking about it. I'm like, oh my gosh. I never thought about it quite like that. I was always thinking about dogs licking their butt and licking owners, how we share organisms. Because sometimes this is a good conversation for just in general parasites, which I always try to talk about very intelligently. But we, unfortunately, since they don't show up very well on testing, but yet we very widely accept treating our animals for parasites,
Yeah.
and then people sleep with their animals. And it's just like, we're in this community together. Like, it's very easy to transmit things.
Yeah.
So, and there's a lot more I could say about that. But I do want to also offer that I think timing, and as far as I know, this is correct. This is what I was taught by my naturopathic mentor, is that if you introduce stomach acid prior to resolving a potential H. pylori infection, which again is not always very easily found on testing, you can drive it further into the tissue potentially, because it is spiraling and burrowing deeply, because it would want to escape that acidity. The acidity, part of the reason that it's really useful, I always talk about like a gate. My stupid joke is that this is why college kids eat pizza that sat out all night, because the stomach acid is supposed to bathe the food that you consume that's full of potential crap that grows. So if you have low stomach acid, that's when the start of any other gut infections can occur and cause issues months, years later. And you might be like, weird.
Yeah. So we have to think about stomach acid. Yes, it is going to help with liberating our nutrients from our food, but it also is very protective against any microbes that we might be consuming or parasites that we might be encountering. And if you don't have enough stomach acid and they're like constantly struggling with parasite issues or bloating and stuff like that, we have to think about, oh, what happened to the bacteria? How come the bacteria is maybe imbalanced in the guts, and exploring that a little bit deeper. But yeah, stomach acid is a huge component to a lot of the GI symptoms.
Yeah. Something else you mentioned as potential root causes for low stomach acid was low zinc. And I want to qualify that a little bit. Also, I want to talk about how people, and then we'll go backwards and talk about how people can assess for low stomach acid. But first, let's talk about zinc, because I think the last 4 years have resulted in a lot of, I think, zinc supplementation and somewhat careless or uninformed supplementation that has maybe resulted in other deficiencies. And that's just the reality of most nutrients, that if you supplement one individually and you don't know the downstream effect, and you do it for a long time, you're creating a deficiency in another area. And that is the relationship with zinc and copper. And some people are deficient in zinc, but let's talk a little bit. What do you want to say about the relationship of zinc and copper? Or do you suggest people assess their zinc level prior to doing anything to support zinc levels in the body?
Yeah, there's the zinc aqueous test that you can do. And so where you're using aqueous zinc to identify, hey, what am I noticing in tasting? Do I taste mineraliness? Do I taste nothing? And that can help to assess like what your zinc status is before you just blindly start doing zinc supplementation.
So it's a type of zinc that you buy and you take a little swig, and if it tastes metallic-y, I think it's deficiency, right? I don't use
Yeah,
this
I think so,
test,
yep.
but that is an option. I am using mineral testing that does show me tissue levels of zinc and copper. I rely on that more than serum testing. One thing we can say is that usually conventionally, no vitamin tests are usually run in conventional blood testing without request. I think zinc would not be a very common one. I would say like vitamin D, vitamin B12, those would be much more accessible. Zinc might be one you can gather. And I would say in general, copper has a bit more nuance. There's a few other pieces like ceruloplasmin, et cetera, that can give you an inference. And there's a specific type of zinc that's very soothing and healing to the gut called zinc carnosine that it also inhibits H. pylori. And it's not a direct translation. I don't know if it's 5 milligrams of zinc can equal 75 milligrams of zinc carnosine, but usually it's 75 milligrams 1 to 2 times per day. And I don't mind doing that short term. It's the long term in individual supplementation that I would discourage with care for the other minerals and nutrients. These are minerals, and I would say in general, to your point, overall depleted minerals are an issue for stomach acid production. That was a big issue for me in practice. I first did a lot of stomach acid repletion through stomach acid supplementation early in practice. And then people, they were better for a while and they got worse again because life and stress and what are the real root causes, right? You can replace something, but what's underneath of that, right? What minerals are depleted? What is your stress? And would you say, what are your thoughts and experience about people's predisposition to being acidic or having acid reflux or low stomach acid?
I honestly haven't thought about the predisposition people.
So I don't do genetic testing anymore. There is at least a gene I know on my genetic test that does talk about stomach acid creation. So that is a possibility. In Ayurvedic medicine this is just like interesting, right? Is all I think about it in terms of, but because I like to think about the emotional relationship a lot in our health and our physiological health. And in Ayurvedic medicine, which I do not know a lot about, there is these archetypes like fire, water, wind, maybe earth. I hope I'm getting close. But they always say kind of fire is like this reactive sort of fiery predisposition to stomach acid. And every once in a while, I will meet a person. I'm like, oh yeah, you're definitely fire in Ayurveda. And I don't know how you are one of these archetypes. I do not remember. I do have an episode with Dr. Raja Simabmani, who is an Ayurvedic dermatologist, and I believe he went over it in that episode. But anyway, every once in a while, these silly things pop into my brain. Not really that silly, honestly. But I do think if you've had reflux, my experience is that you can always have the same issue again if this root causes pop up, right? Learning how to resolve it once it's a great experience because it may happen again, and you may have to resolve it again because life happens to all of us, right?
Especially with H. pylori. If you have H. pylori issue, that can definitely be a recurring thing if you're not addressing like the root cause of, hey, I need to make sure I have enough stomach acid to protect myself from H. pylori coming back.
Yeah. We have a lot of conversations in our practice too about family members and just partners and talking. Sometimes I'll have one client and they're positive for H. pylori. And then I just have a conversation like, hey, does your partner have heartburn or reflux? And do they want to do anything about that? Because otherwise they're going to reinfect you. So not to cause stress. I always say there's always some nuance in here, usually. Okay. So we talked about signs and symptoms that people might have if they don't have stomach acid. We've talked about root causes of low stomach acid. Let's go backwards and talk about how someone might assess in general that they have enough stomach acid.
Okay, so there's two main ways. You could go the conventional route and ask your doctor, your medical provider, to perform a Heidelberg stomach acid test. Like, this is, of course, going to be going through your doctor. It's a medical procedure. You're swallowing a capsule that has a radio transmitter in it, and it's recording the data of the pH of your stomach after drinking a baking soda solution. And your insurance may or may not cover that. And this is a lot more involved than doing just a simple at-home baking soda test. So the baking soda test at home, you're dissolving like 1/4 to 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda in 4 to 6 ounces of water. And you're drinking that first thing in the morning before you eat or drink anything. And you want to drink it quickly. And then you want to time how long it takes for you to burp. So if you are burping within 2 to 3 minutes of drinking that solution, it's thought that you have adequate stomach acid. If you are taking longer than 3 minutes or you don't burp at all, you are probably deficient in stomach acid. And if you are burping in under 2 minutes and you're burping excessively, you probably have excess stomach acid. So this, I would say, repeat this test like a few mornings in a row to gather all of your data and your information. And then we can start to make an assessment around, hey, do you need stomach acid support?
Okay. So let's say someone does this test and they're like, oh my gosh, Brandy, I burped once after 60 minutes, or I burped twice in 45 minutes. What do you say to that person next?
We need to start supporting your stomach acid. And there's multiple ways in which that you can do that. One would be to include some betaine HCl. And I would work with a practitioner who is familiar with this. I don't necessarily recommend people going out and doing this on their own necessarily, but that's using some betaine HCl with pepsin in it, starting really low at 50 milligrams. Midway through a meal, you're taking this as a stomach acid like support while you are working to do other things to increase your stomach acid naturally. So that's one thing. And that's like the extreme. There's multiple little things that you can do first before you reach that point. One would be, are you being mindful at your mealtime? Are you sitting? Are you engaging all your senses? When you sit down and even when you're reading a menu and you're like, oh my gosh, my mouth is watering just reading this, that is digestive enzymes being secreted in your mouth to help break down the carbohydrates you're about to eat. So it's part of the digestive process. So you need to sit down and you need to engage your senses. You need to, what do you hear? What do you smell? What do you taste? What do you see? All of that supports proper digestion. But then chew your food thoroughly so that your body doesn't have to work so hard to digest things as well. Bitter foods or digestive bitters can be really helpful at increasing your stomach acid as well. So thinking about bitter foods would be like arugula or fennel or dandelion greens, some citrus fruits. Those can be bitter, including just a little apple cider vinegar and a little bit of water before a meal. That can, or using digestive bitters, those can help stimulate your stomach acid production as well.
Yeah. I sometimes remind clients that I went to a microbiome conference, and at one of the sessions, they were talking about how there's bitter receptors in the lungs. So I often say bitters do more than we even understand at the moment, right? When, our body is made with all of this wisdom. And so we just always haven't discovered every part of the wisdom. So I love all the suggestions you gave. And like you said, even though the internet may inform you that stomach acid repletion is the first step, I have found through years of experience that it is really not the first step anymore to me personally, and everyone can do their own thing. But what I'll tell you, and this will probably be just most impactful if someone experiences this, if your esophageal or stomach lining, or if your mucosal linings are already very raw or irritated or inflamed, as you were talking about earlier, the fire. And I think in general, there's a good lesson here. If there's a fire, put out the fire first.
Yeah. More fire on the fire.
Yeah, it usually doesn't work to not put out fires. I deal with a lot of skin stuff, and the one exception to internal healing is a fire on top of the skin. Yeah, nothing on the inside is going to put out that fire. Like, we got to put out the fire first. Like, I learned that the hard way, unfortunately. But what I'm trying to say is, if things are on fire already, and you already said this, you must soothe. If you add stomach acid repletion supplements, it will probably hurt like hell. I will just say, like, it probably will. And that might just be something people learn the hard way. And they may have bypassed this episode for that reason. They may be wondering. If stomach acid is low, because stomach acid is one of the first things to go with stress, then I just like to offer and mention that maybe other digestive processes, because other carbohydrate digesting enzymes are secreted in the pancreas, etc., those may also be on the struggle bus. So in general, supporting, just realizing like, most people have a lot of challenges with digestion because we all live in this low-grade stress situation. Anything we can do to improve our digestion, like you said, being mindful, slowing down, those are like the major things that make a huge difference. And they are really hard. They're really hard for people. And for me, it was so hard for so long, almost to an embarrassing point. In college, I would be the first one done eating among all of my dietitian colleagues, like classmates. And I thought for a long time, like, why in the world am I like this? What happened? And we're so often a mirror. And sometimes I'm like, my dad grew up in the military, so he was always eating really fast. So these are the things that you start to, as you start to evaluate your life, you're like, why am I this way?
Right?
How did I
Yeah.
become unconscious of eating, even
Yeah.
though literally my major and like my interest was food? It was such an interesting thing.
Mhm.
So I tell you that because I often like to remind us that we're all just human, and so I never blame us for being humans, and that our own awareness is our best friend in
Yeah.
change and in the best life we can have. Okay, so we talked about how to test for stomach acid. You just talked about what people can do. We talked
Mhm.
about the acid reducing medications. Is there anything we should cover before we leave that topic? Are there any other negative side effects to being on acid reducers long term that you think we didn't cover? Just curious.
Yeah, I do want to point out like acid reducing medications are like one of the top 5 prescribed medications in the US. So it feels like it's handed out willy-nilly, and the FDA has only approved it for short-term use. And a lot of people don't realize that, and they've been on it for years and years and years. And again, like we talked about, you don't just cold turkey, you have a conversation with your medical practitioner and express why you're interested in reducing this medication or coming off this medication. B12 deficiency is really common with these medications that reduce your stomach acid. And so I think it does even say on like the insert, like to take a B12 vitamin when you're on these, because what it's doing is that stomach acid is responsible for activating something called intrinsic factor. And intrinsic factor is needed for B12 absorption. So you can see a lot of B12 deficiencies with people with not enough stomach acid and being on these acid reducing medications long term.
Yeah. So I'll just piggyback on that. That B12 comes from these animal proteins. You have to break them down. You need the stomach acid to activate the intrinsic factor for absorption. And the side effects, there can be several. You can feel like you're walking around in like a fog of fatigue. So it is, if people have ongoing fatigue, there's so many wonderful things you can do so naturally, so easily for better energy. But that is something you can request the doctor pull. You can do self-ordering tests. Like for us, it's like a $5 test. It's pretty simple to do. The caveat I will offer is that the reference range has continued to decline over the years. So to me personally, I think under 500 or under 450 is pretty low. But the reference range is, I think, as low as 275 now. I think that's a little silly. And I think it's not very, I don't think there's really harm in it. I just like to supplement if people don't need stuff. There's a few other nuances, but and the other one I'll offer, because I just have this dramatic story. It wasn't that dramatic, but I remember this young client of mine one time that had low B12, and she had a very hallmark sign besides fatigue, and there's several others as well, is tingly hands and feet. And her dad, I think, had a heart attack, which people come with all these experiences and they're so traumatized that type of thing could happen to them. She said, I just thought I was having a heart attack, like every time my hands and feet
Wow.
Yeah, this is like where her brain goes. And you know what? I'm actually having that conversation with someone else right now. It's like your brain, our brain is always recruiting negative all the time, unhelpful thoughts. It's you're trying to control your stress and your brain's over here like probably having a heart attack.
Right.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Gravy. And it was just a B12 deficiency, right?
Yeah.
Really, literally poor stomach acid. If you have a B12 deficiency, stomach acid is like numero uno to address.
Right.
So it affects lots of things, right?
Yeah. And I think that speaks volumes too of when you say the reference range is declining and declining. Reference ranges at our doctor's office, at the lab, are created based on the population. It's an average of the population that goes to that lab and has that lab drawn. So if we see the level is the reference range is declining and the bottom end is or something like you said, that's because so many people are falling down in the bottom half of this. And so now they're
not saying good things about our society, or at least the people. I think the other possibility, I 100,000% agree with you. And I think my other thought is that I wonder if the people getting the B12 drawn are usually those who are most risk or lowest, right? Like I think most of the time it is certainly not something offered or discussed whatsoever. I think that the opinion is that this happens in an older population. So my experience is that is the only time I've seen it really drawn.
Yeah.
And that's just, I have
a
a skewed experience because why would people see me if they were getting everything they needed their provider, right? Of course, my experience is skewed in that way, of course. So I just want to just claim that for sure. Okay. So we've covered a lot of great, simple, straightforward stuff that I think is so important for this entire digestive process. So soothing the lining, how to test, how to support stomach acid. We've talked a little bit about medications. Sometimes people would ask, and I don't know if we've done a good job talking about this, and maybe we have. I'll just ask if there's anything we've missed here about if people are wanting to really wean off of these acid blockers because they find out, oh, this is short-term use. It really reminds me of steroid use as well, right? Meant for short-term use.
Yeah.
Accidentally gets used forever. When people are trying to wean off of this, are there any other tips you might offer?
Have patience with yourself. It's not a fast process. Everybody wants to like snap at the finger and I'm better and I don't have this anymore. And it's going to be a slow process. So give yourself a little grace over time. Maybe work with a practitioner who does some more of the functional lab testing to understand too, what else is playing a role with this digestive dysfunction? Because with stomach acid being such a key driver, and we think about digestion as a north to south process, it's possibly hindering digestive processes that happen after the stomach. Like the gallbladder is definitely triggered by having enough stomach acid. So releasing that bile. We could also have deficiency in those fat soluble nutrients if we don't have enough bile being released. And that goes back to stomach acid. We could also, the digestive enzyme piece that you hit on a little bit before that are released by the pancreas. When we have enough stomach acid, that little mush ball of food called chyme will sit in the stomach until it is acidic enough that triggers the opening of the stomach into the small intestine. And when that happens, then it triggers the gallbladder to release bile, the pancreas to release these digestive enzymes, which are all really important for this digestive process to break down our food so we're not feeding bacteria, opportunistic bacteria, having the overgrowth of all this stuff happening. So it's such a cascade of events that are happening that we really have to start like from the top down and assess what's going on.
I love that. What Brandy is essentially saying, the cliff notes is that low stomach acid can cause absolutely everything. And when she's talking about the gallbladder needing to be triggered, that's essential for fatty acid breakdown and absorption, which could affect anything from your lipid levels to just dry skin, that or thyroid function, to be honest, for sure. So it's like anything. Like this is relevant to every human. No one is exempt here. It's ask the question, could this be related? Yes. Indirectly, it could be related down the line, for sure. So if you don't digest, absorb, then nothing really can work at its full potential. And your body is incredible at supporting you and protecting you. So it's always going to go like rob Peter to pay Paul somewhere else all the time. And so it does that until it like is, I can't do things. And then you think slow down and then you notice. The end. That's how our health works, I would say.
Well, our symptoms arise and also, I can't tolerate this symptom anymore.
Exactly. It's because sometimes, even though acid reflux is a diagnosis, burping is not really a diagnosis. It's just a clinical sign that you have. But often if people grew up around people who were doing that, they would think, oh, I didn't even know it was unusual. Didn't even know, right? So often that's the case with gas or just whatever. Even for me, it was like, oh, I just have dry skin in the winter because my sisters also have it. We don't know what we don't know. Although everyone listening to this podcast, they know.
They all know.
They're smart. So share this with a friend who doesn't know yet, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Brandy, did we miss anything on this great, like this important foundational topic of stomach acid? And then where can people find you online?
One last thing I have to say about stomach acid and ways to support it. Please don't chug a bunch of water before mealtime because then you're just diluting your stomach acid. And diet culture told us that the way we eat less is to chug a bunch of water before we eat so that we're fuller. Please don't do that. You're just diluting your stomach acid and inhibiting your digestion. You can drink you can sip some water throughout your meal, but let's not chug water. And let's save drinking water to other times of the day. Let's enjoy your meal.
I love it. Brandy, tell us where we can find you online.
Yeah. So you can find me at B Collective Wellness, and that's B like a bumblebee. My website is bcollectivewellness.com. My Instagram handle is B Collective Wellness. Those are the places I'm most active.
Yeah. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Yeah, for sure.
Just keep breaking. I gotta get myself a little more faith.